I want to be there for my students, not only for their academic success, but for all things that they succeed in, and be there to motivate them and to push them to see the potential in themselves.
Hello and welcome to Wellbeing. I'm Jack Hodgins. Today we'll be beginning a two-part episode looking into student wellbeing. We are again joined on the program by teacher Michael Pegiou from Oakleigh Grammar School in Melbourne. Oakleigh Grammar caters for kindergarten to year 12 students and has been operating since 1984. As a year coordinator, Michael experiences the topic of wellbeing on a daily basis both with staff and students and is here today to share his perspective. Hello Michael, and welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Jack.
What is a teacher's role when it comes to student wellbeing?
Well, when it comes to student wellbeing, I think a teacher takes on the role of more than just an educator. They take on the role of a mentor, they take on the role of a carer, a counsellor, sometimes even a parent. And for me personally, I find that as a teacher, more so than as a coordinator, but just as a teacher, I want to be there for my students, not only for their academic success, but for all things that they succeed in, and be there to motivate them and to push them to see the potential in themselves.
So in a lot of ways, a teacher is more than just an academic mentor. They're a life mentor.
In many ways, we get to see students 5 days a week, 6.5, 7 hours a day, and we get to know our students across all year levels. And from year 6 through to year 12, I know most of our students and get to interact with them at least at some point in the week, be it in class or in the yard. So, and especially when we get to go on experiential learning activities with them, going to, for instance, I did a bouldering with some of my students in year 7 and 8 who are transitioning in our transition program, and got to interact with them in that kind of sense where I'm not in a classroom, but I'm seeing kids that are experiencing something new for the first time, whether they've gone rock climbing before, but never bouldering or never even scaling a wall, and just being able to kind of like teach them as well, because I've had a little bit of experience in that, how to get up that wall, motivate them to try something new and to take that risk, and seeing the reward of that in itself. You get to, with experiences like that, it does become more than that academic, educational, care. You really do get to push them and to make them see another side of you as well.
When someone says student wellbeing to you, what are some of the topics that kind of come to your mind?
Supporting students. It's in relation to being there to ensure a safe environment for them, be it off-site or on-site, especially with remote. It's also being there to listen to them and to have them feel heard. One of the biggest things that we try and ensure is improving capacity for students to engage with staff and with the wider community, and share their thoughts on things. So student voice is a real big area that we're continually trying to improve on, and being there as a listener, and sometimes as an advisor as well for students when they do want to float ideas, or if things are going not the best and they want to come forward and seek that guidance. I think that's a really important thing to consider. I had a student in year 12, for instance, that I taught who kind of needed that listener within, to be that listener, to be there for them when they were going through a really challenging time this year and felt like they couldn't get through it at all. And this was as early as term 1. And just by sitting there and giving them that time at least once a week, saying, hey, just come in, sit with me half an hour every day after school if you want to. I'm happy to have a listen and just to see what I can give you as a bit of advice and what support I can give. It really did give that student the opportunity to kind of vent their frustrations, give really a great insight into how they were going. And so then when I was teaching them, and also when I was communicating with their head of school, but also their coordinator in year 12, I was able to impart a little bit more information that they may not have known, and that this student was willing to tell me, that then allowed us to get the student not only through the year, but doing their exams when they thought they couldn't. And it was the best thing that by the end of the year, this student came to me and was just able to say, sir, it's because of you that I made it through. And I told him I don't think it was. I said to him, look, you could have gotten through this without me, for sure. You're a great kid. And he was just able to still say, though, but you made it a lot easier. And I think something like that is just what always makes this job well worth all the time that you put into it. So that's kind of when wellbeing comes up, that's how I kind of see it. We're there to support, we're there to provide a safe environment, we're there to listen, we're there to advise, we are there to care for those students, because in doing so, we create great individuals that go out there and will do the same thing for others.
Are there any specific topics within kind of student wellbeing that are really on the radars of schools at the moment?
Some topics that are on the radar for sure, especially post-COVID, are social anxiety. There's been a lot of instances where students come to my office, and even like that rock climbing excursion, but other excursions as well that come up, the students will come in and they'll vent not only their frustration with other students, but kind of their fears over whether or not they feel like they can participate because of, I don't know, maybe just how they feel inwardly or the confidence that they once had no longer being there, but also just that anxiety around being around so many people now. And I can understand that because of all this time that they've spent away from others, just jumping straight back into it and going out and doing things as if it were the same and as if it was all back to normal is difficult for some students to grasp. Another big one was workload and screen time. So we tried to reduce, and we, for the most part, did reduce a lot of the time students spent on screen once they came back on site. And even assessments were cut down for students in some areas because we figured there's no point really over assessing our kids. It's really important to try and alleviate that pressure. But students still felt, even with the cut down of assessment tasks and even with additional time being given for assessment to wrap up the year, that there was just a severe amount of anxiety and stress toward work still. And I think that that's going to be something that reoccurs in future, where students are really struggling to get back into that routine, back into the habit of doing set amount of work over time, and back into the habit of being able to like spend their time off screen and on screen. It's going to be really difficult to try and get them to distance themselves from a screen, obviously because they use it within their own leisure time, and to then be motivated enough to go back to it when it comes to their work. Hopefully with the holiday break now here, for some students, or coming up for some students, it will be something that gives them that bit of a refresh. But I don't know, Jack, if you felt it, but I certainly have. Even now, if I have to go and sit and watch a screen for 3 hours, I struggle to maintain that concentration. It's almost like I've got lockdown PTSD, being like, I can't do this anymore, and it doesn't get easier, so that's something that we have to be mindful of as well. And then I guess the last thing would be avoidance. There are some students that do feel like they are better off just working things out on their own and really do struggle to come and seek that additional counselling from either their teachers or from the school counsellor. And something that we need to work on is getting students to feel comfortable with opening up with us, or at least someone that they feel like they can do it with, and being able to vent their frustrations and to share their anxieties so that we can help them get through it.
Despite the social anxiety that you mentioned there, was there a positive shift, do you think, when students made the transition back to school, physical school?
Most definitely. And although there are some of those are areas of concern, they are not the majority. The majority of students came back, heads held high, beaming smiles. The yard was full of laughter and a lot of excitement again as they were back on site with their friends and seeing some people that they hadn't seen in months. It really was a great thing to have them all back in class, in the yard, doing, for the most part, what they usually would have done before. And it really did bring up not only the spirit of students, but the spirit of staff as well, because the reason I'm in teaching, and we all are, is to be there for the kids. And when the kids aren't there and you're staring at a screen, and let's be real, most of the kids don't have their cameras on, it does disengage you a little bit. And you do feel like it's very difficult to get that same reward that you get. You don't get those aha moments in class when kids can click when they get a concept. You don't get that real sense of joy from having the students in the yard asking you to kick a football or asking you to get on the futsal court with them. It was a great thing having all of them back on site, and many of them did find that being back on site just bolstered their spirits once again.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we are discussing wellbeing of students. My guest today is teacher and year coordinator Michael Pegiou from Oakleigh Grammar School in Melbourne. How do you approach that when a student is kind of internalising it all? Because I imagine it could be a real challenge.
Yeah, it is. So one thing that I think a lot of teachers are great at is reading people. You spend years with children or with others in your organisation, and you get to see them as they grow, but also you get to understand their normal patterns of behaviour. And despite 2 years of lockdown, we've still seen our kids in different parts of the year on site. And I have some students that I've been teaching for 2 or 3 years straight, from year 8 through to 10, or from my year 7 I've seen them, and then they were with my year 9s this year. And so you get a feel for what those students usually would have been like, and when they return back on site, you can see if there's a difference. You can hear if there's a difference in their tone. Are they still around their same friends? Are they engaging with everyone else? Do they seem like they've shut themselves off? When you're doing group activities, particularly in like a pastoral sense, which is more like a holistic class that we run, where we have students do focus on other kind of skills rather than just academic, do they seem to go along with the tasks, or do they seem mainly to be shut off from it all? And I like to do, and our school does, a lot of wellbeing checks through different surveys that we run online, but also different activities that we do where we get the students to check in with us. And it does give us an understanding, for the most part, of where those students are at. So when a student does disengage, we tend to pick it up fairly quickly. And I liaise with the school counsellor saying, hey, has this student come to you at all? Have you been dealing with this student? And Fiona is wonderful. She will always, be quick to respond. And, I often have meetings with her where she'll illuminate, if there are students that have come across her radar that I need to be mindful of, and I'll do the same thing for her, and maybe even refer those students to her just as a catch up, even just to have a chat with her to see how things are going. So we tend to pick it up really well. And that's thanks to the great staff at our school as well that can send me that usually will send me an email and say, hey, I've noticed this kid isn't faring so well. Or we have wellbeing meetings in each of our year levels every 2 weeks. And in each of those wellbeing meetings, the home group staff who are there each morning with those students, and that predominantly will be teaching those students in their year level, will flag any students of concern that they have. And we have a system by which we then will also highlight the names of those students, take notes next to them, and we'll put an action forward for the teacher to follow up with. And that might just be a simple conversation with the student. It might be a call home to see how the student's going. It might be an email to the student to say, if there's anyone you need to chat to, feel free to come forward. There's different ways in which we deal with it, but we have a range of different systems, but also procedures in place to kind of see where students are at. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you can miss them. Unfortunately, that is the nature of any organisation. Sometimes someone will fall through the cracks, but I will say that for the most part, I think we do really well in trying to identify early on where our students are at if they are having difficulties.
Why is it important that we look at student wellbeing?
I think wellbeing is a really important issue to continue considering, because if a student isn't faring well, if they are unhappy, if they are not themselves, it will most definitely impact their enjoyment at school. If their enjoyment is impacted, then their friendship circles will probably be impacted. That can have a detrimental effect on the classroom community. It'll impact their learning. And ultimately, it will mean that they don't get the best from their education. They will not take up the opportunities that are afforded to them at the school that they are at. They will not probably see the great qualities within themselves that they can continue to grow within their school environment, or even outside their school environment. And if they do tend to get worse and we don't pick that up, it does, I think, mean that the system lets them down a little bit, because it doesn't allow them to reach their full potential. So wellbeing is a huge thing that we need to continue considering and keeping an eye on, because it's going to be an area that I think in the next couple of years, while getting more attention, will also be filled with ambiguity. We don't know the full effect of what a lockdown, for instance, can have. And here in Victoria, especially being the state that has been locked down the most, we don't know not only the effect on wellbeing from a social isolation point, but we don't know the effect on wellbeing, for instance, for students that have fallen behind in academic areas. So that's something that's going to be coming up, I think, across the next few years. If a student has not engaged online at all and has really found it challenging, next year, if they are on site, there will be more issues that we will have to deal with when they are not grasping the content in their class, and they are then going to fall further behind if they don't address that. So there's a lot of things that we need to consider for wellbeing. It's not just the social stuff. It's not just things like bullying. It is self-confidence. It is the capacity to which a student feels like they can engage within a classroom and can actually contribute to a classroom. So these are all the areas, and probably more I haven't touched on, that need to be planned for in future.
Have you found that student wellbeing has become a more wider talked about topic than, say, when you were at school?
Most definitely. I think when I was at school, it was focused on, and we did talk about it, but I don't recall having the same measures in place that I once had at my school. And I was a bit different. I didn't go to a private school. I went to a state school of 1,400 students, so it was a fairly large school where, don't get me wrong, I had great teachers and the teachers did their jobs very well in my school. But obviously, when you are a coordinator of a school where you manage, like myself, over 2-year levels, about 160 students, let's say, it's a lot different to being a coordinator at a school where you're managing 250 students per year level. And so their focus would have been a bit different, where we can continue looking at individual students and having some time to focus on the individuals. You kind of have to, I think, take more of a group approach for those larger cohorts that you might have to deal with. Nonetheless, I think that wellbeing definitely has become a far bigger topic now, a area that schools are more conscious of and will try and address to the best of their ability, now more so than ever, because there's more data available. We have more tools online than ever before to measure data, where in the past we would have to write on a piece of paper, let's say, that would indicate how we are going, or have a chat in person, and that would take a lot more time. We now have the capacity to share a link with students that can be completed within 5 minutes once a week at the start of the week, that will give a quick indication of, almost like a traffic light check: green, you're good; orange, you're not the best; red, you need support. That kind of system I never had. And sometimes students don't realize that, because they get surveyed out. Let's be real. They're sick of doing surveys, but they don't realize that all this information is useful and does help to give myself, other coordinators, the execs within the school, and their home group teachers information that allows us to cater to their needs to a greater degree. And I think that's the benefit of now, as opposed to back when I was in school. You have so many more resources and tools available to give you an idea of what to do when it comes to any student issue. Because you might target generally, let's say, bullying as an issue, and bring up the same topic each year of what to avoid. But with what we have now, we can identify if it's going to be an issue in relation to, are students being bullied for, let's say, physical issues? Is it more a mental type of problem that we're facing here, where there's or online bullying? If it's not bullying, is it more a wellbeing issue in relation to students' sleep patterns, or behaviours outside of school, a mistrust of adults, for instance? We have data from the Monash Youth Resilience Survey that is wonderful, that will come to us, and we can break down and then create lessons in our pastoral program around, where we can have students talk about and learn about different areas of wellbeing, specifically in relation to where they fared in comparison to the rest of Australia in those areas. We might be really strong as a school in creating a great sense of community, but we may fail in ensuring that our young men feel like they have a sense of responsibility over certain areas, and that they can feel like they are empowered.
You're listening to Wellbeing, where we are discussing wellbeing of students. My guest today is teacher and year coordinator Michael Pegiou from Oakleigh Grammar School in Melbourne. Have you found that the student surveys have students been utilising that time to really go, I'm struggling here, can I have some help? Have students really utilised it?
Oh, yeah, there's been many instances where I've had students that I've had either one-on-one chats with, or I've had to make a call home or refer to a counsellor because of these surveys that have picked it up. And sometimes a student will also, which is pretty funny sometimes, click the wrong thing. And so you go up to them, he's like, how are you going? Is everything okay? You call them into your office, they'll come in and they'll be like, no, I'm fine. I didn't realize that this meant this. I'm like, okay, so you're all good. And they're like, yeah, that's fine. And those are great instances because those kids also then realize, hey, it actually does work. And, if there ever are issues, I can just come and talk to my coordinator. But there might also be times where you've got students that you didn't realize that things were going so difficult. So all of a sudden, because they've indicated, yeah, I do need to speak to someone, and then, I get on board and the counsellor gets on board, we then have the opportunity to address it, put plans in place, and have this student try out maybe even sometimes a new routine at school to get them behaving the right way. I had a student from the start of the year who faced significant social issues, and it wasn't until they flagged in a survey that it came to me that then I was able to have a chat with that student, organize a 10-minute chat at the start of every day with that student for the next 2 or 3 weeks, where I got them to check in with me. We went over how they're going to go throughout the day. And then after the day, they'd also check in with me to tell me how their day went. And it was a lot of work, but that student came out of it a lot better. Their friendship circle grew again. They were able to come back to school with a renewed sense of energy, and they no longer felt like they couldn't deal with the day. So not just the surveys, but having staff that are able to see how students are going and through their own great intuition, just raise it in a meeting, and then it leads to a conversation with that student by myself or with them involved. These are the methods that continue to prove useful to help with the way in which we deal with wellbeing at our school.
How do you approach some of those hard moments when a student comes to you with a really confronting issue?
When a student comes with you, I've had this happen a few times. Again, the best thing you can do is sometimes you don't react, you listen. You let that student talk, you let them air as much frustration, as much as they are willing to share out, and you are there to be able to just have to be that support mechanism for them as they can talk through where they are at or what's going on. After they've done that, I find that the best thing to do, and sometimes I have to stop myself from doing it too much, but is to give a little bit of advice on what they can do in the immediate moment to kind of deal with the situation. I don't like to try and plan too far ahead when things are really serious. I like to look at, okay, so what can we do to make sure you're going to be okay at school day to day? What can I do? Once that's addressed, and with those really serious issues, I then obviously will refer it to my head of school. I will go to the school counsellor, see what support mechanisms are in place there with the student's permission as well. I'll always ask the student, are you okay with me going to the school counsellor and recommending a session? Most of the time, they will always say yes, because that's why they've come to me, is to get, I guess, a foot in the door in that sense, because they don't want to go on their own. And you slowly work through the issue. You call home if it's okay to do so. Some situations, it might be where the student says, I really don't want you calling home and explaining this, so you have to talk again to your head of school and see if you can do that. When it comes to child safe issues, if it is anything that has to be reported, that there's mandatory reporting that we have to do. Obviously, I have to go through the right procedure there, but in some instances, it's more so that there's difficult things going on at home. The student just needs someone to listen, and they're just having a really hard time dealing with that. So you need to just make sure you're there for them. You need to make sure that they understand that when they're at school, that is their safe place, and that is the place where they can kind of get a bit of a breather from these issues. And if it does get overwhelming, they can find that solace. I think that's the big thing. You need to make sure that students, because there's only so much you can do for a student in terms of their well-being, because we only see them on site, right?
Yep.
There's only so many things we can do to make sure they're okay. And once they leave school, obviously chats can go home, emails go home, support can be there in many ways as well through other institutions that can be offered to students to go, for instance, recommended to them to deal with these things. But while they're at school, we put for the right procedures. We are there to care for them and to make sure that they feel like this is not a place that you need to avoid. This is a place that you need to feel at your best.
Is friendships a topic that comes up a lot?
Yeah, and it's a challenging topic at that because you can't force students to be friends. You can't just pair students up and say, "Hey, you're buddies now." It doesn't work that way. And if you try and force it, it makes it worse. So you don't get me wrong, we create a buddy system and we try to make sure that we pair students up with students that are likely, especially new students, that are likely to then get along with them and probably bring them into their friendship circle. But when it comes to also friendship circles breaking down, it is a challenging topic and it is something that we have to face on a not day to day, but at least on a weekly basis once we come back on site. Kids at the moment, I feel, are continuing to deal with these lockdowns in their own way. And like I said, it can make them isolate, but it also can go the other end where they kind of, now being surrounded by people again, are almost hypersensitive to everything and really just take notice of if there are issues with others, they'll get really worried about it, or it can make them even more intense in their friendship circles. So it's something that we have to deal with and have to consider by really dealing with it on a larger scale. We focus on the culture of the school. We focus on the opportunities to develop these friendships through the experiences we give students. So instead of focusing on the more micro issues or the smaller areas like individual friendships, we tend to focus on how we can create a better sense of community amongst the students. And in that sense, they'll be able to grow together. They'll have these experiences together, create new memories together, which hopefully leads to greater friendships over time. And when I say that, what we did, for instance, is we would have an activity week while we were online. When we were online, we did a full activity week with virtual experiences with the students. We had also a Oakleigh Grammar MasterChef competition where teachers were cooking their own dishes against each other, and while they were online, the students were cheering for teachers. They were voting for which teachers they wanted to win, and we had a final reveal at the end. It was awesome. On site, like I said, we also planned different things. We had a whole week, 3 days on transition, where for the cohorts in middle school, we arranged different experiences outdoor, got students into teams, and I think they did this in the senior school anyways as well, and just got them working together as teams, be it in beach volleyball that we did, be it for like an amazing race activity we did, in the botanical gardens. There were a range of different activities that we had students partake in, because for me personally, I find that students develop friendships through experiences and through being given the opportunity to do something new together. I think that when it comes to excursions and to camps or anything that's not in a classroom, these are where, at least for me, I have some of my fondest memories of school. And this is where me and my friends now from high school, or even some I've kept from primary school, still can reminisce and reflect on and say, hey, do you remember this? And really, that's what you want to, as a coordinator, try and create within your school, these memories with students and creating these new friendships.
This was part one of a two-part program looking into student wellbeing with teacher and year coordinator Michael Pegiou from Oakleigh Grammar School in Melbourne. Thank you for listening. I'm Jack Hodgins, and all of us at Wellbeing wish you well.